secretive and complex corruption in the big house. And for the purpose of this video, the big house will be the central office of the Florida Department of Corrections, the Secretary of Corrections, and the Undersecretary of Corrections who served prison time. And this is a scenario that continues to go on today, decades and decades into the 2020s, and here we are still having some issues with some of the leaders in corrections. And how are we ever going to get respect, gain respect, and earn respect if our leaders don't walk the line? Mea maxima culpa, my biggest fault. The fault is not always with the individual. Sometimes it's with the head of the organization, and their actions trickle down to the frontline staff who feel they can get away with things because of the actions of the higher ups. I know it. Some people are already upset, especially if you're high-ranking people. Let me explain a little further. Gary York, True Prison Stories. Thank you for watching this video. On April 24th, 2007, the Florida Department of Corrections Secretary James Crosby was sentenced to 8 years federal prison for taking kickbacks from the inmate canteen funds, for having elaborate parties and limousines, and promoting people in the field, especially women who would come to his parties. They would get a field promotion, would not have to go through the proper channels for promotions, or if they did, they were a shoe-in to get the promotion. There was drunkenness, there was fights, there was sex. It was all over the news for 2 years that put a black eye on the Florida Department of Corrections. The Undersecretary, Alan Clark, on April 25th, 2007, was sentenced to 2 years and 7 months federal prison. 90 top Florida prison officials, wardens, colonels, majors, captains were demoted or fired. And 280 frontline staff were moved, demoted, or fired. You know, sergeants and lieutenants and so forth, and officers. What a black eye. So now, why do I say that sometimes you have to start at the top? Well, because if you have leaders that are allowing abuse of inmates and covering up for their buddies, now you are sending a message out across the state. Officers are saying, hey, we won't get in trouble. We've got a secretary that'll back us up. And now you've started this little family, you know, be with us or you're out. And now you have a lot of honest, hardworking officers that are scared to say anything, scared to report corruption. How can you report corruption? How can you possibly report corruption if the top man is involved in it and covering things up? People at that time were just scared to death to report anything. You would go to ask questions and people would just tight-lipped. And you know, that's what puts a black eye on the Department of Corrections. And in the end, all these people that got away with it for years lost their careers. The Secretary of Corrections lost a 30-year career. He had to pay restitution back for the kickbacks of money he was taking from the inmate canteen funds and so forth, the visitation canteen funds and so forth. He was taking money from, and he lost his entire retirement. Ended up a poor man. Sounds like a movie, doesn't it? Of course, this was not a movie. This was the real thing. This was the real deal. So, the temptation is there, and we have to avoid the temptation. It can be at the highest level where people in charge of corrections can be tempted to dip money out of funds, Department of Corrections funds, take kickbacks. You know, what's $1,200 a month going to do? You'll never see it missing. Well, Thank goodness it was discovered, and this secretary went to prison. Leaders must set the example. Leaders must have integrity, must be honest, and must do what's best for the correctional officers and everyone behind the walls of the prison. And if you don't have that type of leader, what have you got? You must have a leader with integrity, intestinal fortitude, and not be taken in by temptation, greed, and power. Power will destroy you. A power-hungry leader, a greedy leader, and in this case, a thief, will destroy an entire Department of Corrections and wreck it. If you want the full story from beginning to end, which includes all of the parties and everything that happened and even caused a captain to commit suicide over a lot of these things that went on at that time, it's in my book, Inside the Inner Circle, chapter 24, titled Mea Maxima Culpa, Secretive and Complex Corruption in the Big House. A book of true prison stories that occurred in the Florida Department of Corrections. I just gave you a little taste of it today, but the real meat is inside that chapter with the sex, the fights, the brawls, the drunkenness, and the stealing.